Hi, welcome to Got Questions. I'm Parker, a friend and right-hand man to Dr. William DiPaolo. Will is an immunologist and he's been studying the microbiome since before it was called the microbiome, actually. So for about 10 years. Specifically, Will studies the bacteria that reside in the gut, in the intestines. Currently, Will is up at UW Medicine, University of Washington Medical Center in Seattle. He is the director for Center for Microbiome Sciences and Therapeutics, CMIST, and he also runs his own lab. So in this episode, which I've cut into 4 parts, we will talk about the PUFA project, polyunsaturated fatty acids. This project was started at USC Keck Medical School when Will was still down here in California. And the project was started with Denise Shack. So sometimes it's called Denise's project. She was the graduate student who was on the project. Denise graduated from the UW in 2019. So in the first part of this 4-part episode, that's my puppy Tobias, if you happen to be watching this. I'm just going to keep going because he's being so quiet. But Will's going to lay the foundation for this project by introducing the stars of the project, the PUFAs, the Omega-6 and Omega-3 fatty acids. So he'll explain the fatty acids and go into some good detail about the importance of the ratio of those fatty acids in relation to one another for optimal health. And keep in mind, actually, this study is an infection study. Will and Denise wanted to explore how the gut microbes are affected during an infection in the presence of PUFAs. But we don't really get into that until the next part of this, until part 2 of this episode. So with that, I give you my friend and boss, Dr. Will DiPaolo. Say bye, Tobias. Okay. Hi.
Hi. Hello.
We are now recording officially. Episode 5 of Gut Questions, polyunsaturated fatty acids.
Yes. Fatted acids.
Yeah.
Not to be mistaken for just fat acids.
Exactly. Those acids are fatted.
Okay, it's early in the morning, as you can.
Well, not really.
No, not really. It's early anyway. It's Friday.
But nobody knows that. So
let's just say it's Friday. Let's just say it's Friday.
Yeah, there you go. That's the excuse.
Yeah. Okay, so what?
So I want to talk about Miss Dr. Shack's project, Denise's project, which I always called either Denise's project or the infection project. Is that right? Are we going to talk about infection?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to walk me through that and why it's important and why do I care and all of
that whole thing, the whole, just basically summarize it and tell you why you should care. Okay, so
me meaning the
general
public,
anyone out there who's listening who wants to
exactly for our one listener who's my mom.
so
I don't even think she's listening when I sent it to her. I haven't gotten a comment about it.
So polyunsaturated fatty acids, or what people refer to as PUFAs, which is different from a PUFTER, which we can talk about that later. But PUFA,
that's not a joke.
It's a slang term from.
I thought you were gonna go into like a SNL.
Yeah.
What's his name? Who would go to the parties and be like, "Oh, it's like when you go to the."
Oh, Stefan, yeah. Okay. Back on topic. Polyunsaturated fatty acids, they are basically, these are a type of fat that is in all of our foods, or most of the foods we eat, and they generally fall into 2 categories. Polyunsaturated fatty acids, they can be grouped as an omega-3 fatty acid or an omega-6 fatty acid, and that's basically dependent upon the molecular
structure.
structure. So yeah, so if there's like a certain chain in one form, it's omega-6, and if it's another form, it's omega-3. That's really not anybody really that important for anybody out there listening. It's probably just the fact that there's these two categories. And omega-6 fatty acids, so basically what we're supposed to eat fatty acids in a proportion of 20 to 1. I mean, I'm sorry, of like a 1 to 1 or a 1 to 3 ratio. So you need to have a healthy balance of your omega-6s and your omega-3s. You shouldn't be eating all omega-3s, you shouldn't be eating all omega-6s. There should be a balance. And I've heard people say a 1 to 1 ratio or a 3 to 1 ratio, with the bigger number being the omega-3s. What's sad is that in the United States right now, we are at a 20 to 1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. So we're eating actually 20 times more omega-6s, consuming 20 times more omega-6s than omega-3s in the United States or Western diet. And that's bad because omega-6s are actually involved in inflammation, and they potentiate inflammation and inflammatory processes. So they contribute towards obesity, insulin resistance, metabolic dysregulation. They found patients with high omega-6 levels have ulcerative, tend to be, people with ulcerative colitis tend to have higher omega-6 ratios.
And certainly someone with NAFLD, I would imagine, that we talked about last week, would probably have a ratio that's completely out of whack as well.
Right, NAFLD, yes, exactly. So
non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Right, so non-alcoholic fatty liver disease patients will have a higher amount of omega-6 potentially in their diet because of the types of fat that they're consuming. And
so that would be like your palm oil and your corn oil.
Right, so the fats that these omega-3s and omega-6s are pretty much found in sort of various oils that are produced, and you don't find particularly, so most of these oils are pretty much a mixture of both. Like you're not going to find something that's there's a few out there that are, there's a few out there that are like all omega-6. Like I think actually coconut oil has a high amount of omega-6 fatty acid. But that's balanced off by the high amount of monounsaturated fats, monounsaturated fats. So just because it has the high
omega-6,
I'm sorry, it's balanced by the saturated. So coconut oil, we can spend some time talking about coconut oil because it's actually interesting. It's very high in saturated fat, and it's very high in omega-6, but that omega-6 is a small amount, so there's just no omega-3 in it whatsoever. So that's why the ratio is so skewed towards omega-6. And really, it's the makeup of coconut oil is saturated fat. And we talked about in the NAFLD that the saturated fat, it's a lauric acid that makes it up, and that lauric acid actually has been shown to have some health benefits. So again, I think it's a gray area when we talk about fats, that there's some, like, everybody thinks saturated fats are bad, but actually there's some saturated fats that are good, and the source of that saturated fat's important. And the components, what makes up that saturated fat, like the lauric acid, is important. So it's not just as easy as like good versus bad. And I think that that's really hard for people in the United States or around the world. Like, if
they don't like a gray area.
People just want an answer, and like if you can't give them a black or a white, then it makes things, then they kind of space out. So there's no black or white here. You really have to just do your homework. So, but as far as fatty acid, omega-6 and omega-3s go, like flaxseed oil, you and I were talking about earlier. Flaxseed oil has a high amount of omega-3, but it still has a decent amount of omega-6 too. The ratio is like, I think from an omega-6 to an omega-3 ratio, it's like 0.3 omega-3 to omega-6 or something like that. So it's just a little bit more omega-3s. Safflower oil doesn't have any omega-3 in it. It's actually all omega-6 and monounsaturated fat. So
safflower oil.
Safflower oil. So safflower oil would be an omega-6 potentiator. Canola oil is got a higher amount of omega-6 as well, but it does have omega-3 component to it, but it's a little bit more omega-6. And then flaxseed oil, we said, is more omega-3. And then the stuff that we like, olive oil is actually really high in monounsaturated fats, monounsaturated fats, but and has a very tiny amount of both omega-6 and omega-3. So like, you
So
know,
the cooking oil that is used in this country then is
corn oil.
Yeah, right. That's probably what you would find in a restaurant.
Yeah, corn
That
oil.
is corn oil is gonna
Maybe canola oil, I think.
or a mix.
Yeah.
Because I have seen in restaurant stores what is just called cooking oil.
Oh, right,
so
right.
I don't know what that is. It's probably a mix of a few things.
Yeah,
but
so I think your canola oil and your corn oil are actually gonna be much more skewed towards omega-6. Olive oil is a little bit more skewed towards the omega-3. Or like they're a little bit more balanced in the olive oil, but the cooking oil is definitely corn oil and canola oil are much more omega-6 heavy, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing either, because you have to have the balance, right? So there's supposed to, again, it's supposed to be a balance of omega-3 and omega-6. You just don't want to skew yourself so that you're only consuming oils or fats that are composed of omega-6s.
Right, because your body does need both the 3 and the 6, like you were saying earlier. It's just the ratio, but also the source.
Right. And so then salmon fish oil or salmon.
I know. I was like,
where did that come from?
He's never said it like that.
Salmon. I'm like a mailman. No, salmon oil. So salmon oil or fish oil or things like that. All these derived from fishes are omega-3 rich and omega-3 heavy. And so that's why there's been this trend towards consuming fish oils as a supplement. I think because it really will help people make that balance better so that they can start accumulate or eating more or intaking more omega-3s, because I think a lot of these oils that people do use have a high amount of omega-6 in them. So the supplements can help in that sense. So the other thing, so basically, if people want to go, there's all sorts of information online about these different fats and like the components of these oils and whatever. So look online if you have real questions, and just pay attention if they're showing you the ratio between the two, or if they're actually showing you like the concentration, like the actual how much. It can be confusing. The other thing about polyunsaturated fatty acids is that we don't make them ourselves. Our body does not make PUFAs. We have to acquire them through a diet or through another source. So we don't make them, and then we can't even, so we don't synthesize them. So that means that our bacteria in our gut will also play a role in our being exposed to these essential fatty acids. So they're essential because they're called an essential fatty acid because we don't make them, so we have to find them. They're essential to us, but we have to find them elsewhere, and through diet mostly, and take them in. And then anything coming in through the oral, like anything you ingest is going to come in contact with bacteria, and bacteria can actually of the microbiome, and those microbiome constituents, the bugs down there can actually they metabolize polyunsaturated fatty acids as well as our own cells. So you have both the bacteria of our gut that can take in these omega-3s and omega-6s, and then you have the cells of our epithelium that can absorb them and also metabolize them as well. So I think a lot of studies up to a point have been like paying more attention to the role of these sort of polyunsaturated fatty acids in our own tissues. And that's important because, like I said, omega-6 is associated with inflammatory dysregulation and inflammatory disease. And omega-3, on the other hand, has been touted as sort of like this, like a very healthy fat, and can dampen inflammation and all this sort of thing. And so, and it can antagonize omega-6 in a lot of ways. Like it basically competes with some of the same cellular binding and enzymes
Oh,
and stuff. So like the ratio is important because if you have more omega-3, that means
yeah.
you're promoting that sort of pathway, and and omega-6, and so I
So
lost
if
my
you
train.
have, like you said in one of the previous, I think it was the NAFL podcast episode last week, a bad environment,
Yeah,
then just and then you add more omega-6 than you should, you're just going to promote that bad environment further.
right, exactly. So I think the idea is that if you're already in an inflamed state, adding more omega-6 would continue that sort of negative inflammatory state, like you'd be
Right.
promoting inflammation. Whereas consuming omega-3 has been shown to dampen omega-6 responses and induce like suppressive immune responses to kind of dampen inflammation. And there's a whole bunch of things that we can talk about that at the end if we have time, but like immunological regulation by omega-3 is like, is quite detailed and very intricate. So I think it's probably beyond the scope of what we want to talk about today.
So yeah, that is a lot of detail about PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids. And we barely scratched the surface of those fatty acids. But I think the most important thing to remember and to understand is that we do need both omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids, but it's the ratio in which we consume them that is important. And how to track that for yourself, that's a question for a nutritionist. Will is here for the research. And speaking of that, in the second part of this 4-part episode, we'll get into the design of the project itself. He'll lay out why he actually decided that this would ultimately be a bacterial infection study as opposed to a microbiome study. And that was actually really interesting to me because I had no idea about the backstory for this project. And he also explains the design of the project, how they set it up, how they set up the experiments, which is very eye-opening for me. And you'll see that or hear that in my voice, I suppose, and certainly in my facial expressions. I swear I do listen during presentations, and I saw Denise present this many times at lab meetings. But I don't know, maybe it's these one-on-ones with Will that somehow are just more interesting to me and engaging for me. And I don't know, I get to jump in with a bunch of questions. Maybe that helps too. Anyway, I hope that it's interesting for you as well to see how this project evolved. And if you've got questions for Will, please let me know in the comments section or on our website in the contact page, yourgutquestions.com, or shoot me an email directly at my email, which is aparker@medicine.washington.edu. See ya.